Welcome, and thank you all for joining us today. I am Jessica Luz, the Director of Knowledge Creation and Research here at the Kauffman Foundation. And I'm delighted to be joined by our colleagues from Smart Incentives, as well as a fabulous lineup of panelists to discuss a new research report titled COVID-19 and Entrepreneurial Firms, Seeding an Inclusive and Equitable Recovery. The report includes a deep dive into federal, state, and local relief and recovery funds that emerged in the midst of COVID-19. And it examines the extent to which various programs address inequities experienced by small and new firms, especially businesses owned by Black, Indigenous, and people of color, businesses owned by women, and businesses owned by individuals in historically under-resourced communities. The report highlights some of the more inclusive and equitable programs that have been put in place by states and local governments, and it provides key insights to help inform more equitable program design. The Entrepreneurship Issue Forums are a series that we host in order to bring research, practice, and policy together and focus on a specific topic about entrepreneurship. And as a reminder, as with every forum, the Kauffman Foundation takes no legislative or political position on the discussions. And with that, I will turn things over to my colleague, Lauren Higgins, to talk about today's agenda.
Wonderful. My name is Lauren Higgins, and I am a program officer with the Kauffman research team. And just an overview for today. So today we'll begin with Darrene Hackler from Smart Incentives, providing a brief overview of the report and the key insights that Jessica just mentioned. And then following this overview, we'll turn to a panel discussion and hear from leaders of recovery programs from across the country who have worked to integrate more equitable design principles and processes into their programs. Joining us for our panel today will be Andy Reid with Prosper Portland, Katie Johnson with Next Street, and Tara Palacios with BizLaunch. They will be joined by Ellen Harpel and Darrene Hackler with Smart Incentives during that panel discussion. And I will also be moderating questions in the chat to feed that into the panel discussion. So if you have some thoughts or questions about the insights, go ahead and place those in the chat, and I'll be monitoring that and bringing those in for the panel discussion as we move forward. So with that, I'm actually going to hand it over to Darrene Hackler from Smart Incentives to give us an overview of the key insights from this report. Thank you very much.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the pleasure of being here today. Really, it's one of these things, and we do more and more of these Zoom presentations. We are finding our way through the technology, and it's nice to have these support systems that Kauffman Foundation has really provided for us during the ability, giving us the ability to share the findings that Jessica has reviewed. And I think the one thing I would like to start with is that this opportunity to work with them and really start thinking about the impacts that COVID-19 has had on small businesses and new firms has given us a deeper reflection and enabled us to bring these experts to the table today. So thank you very much for joining us, and to Kauffman for providing the opportunity to have this conversation, because businesses, as we know, are still having trouble staffing with their supply chains, and there's a lot of uncertainty and inflation in terms of how they grow their businesses. So with that, my partner, Ellen Harpel, and I were funded by Kauffman Foundation to examine how state and local governments are using businesses incentives back in 2019. And we finished this report up about when COVID was beginning. And our conversations as we went through looking at that report, and then with Jessica about the pandemic's inequitable impacts, really led us to think about, what were we trying to share? And it led to this report that we're going to share with you today. And we really needed to take a deeper dive into understanding how local relief and recovery funds are going to try to assist businesses. And as we know, this is still unfolding. Many of the states and locals are still, putting their programs out. And so what we did was we really tried to take a look at the equity issues in terms of the programs that were coming out of these states and local funding opportunities. And those, as Jessica mentioned, the BIPOC and women-owned and individuals from under-resourced communities are more likely to face access to capital issues. And so today, the forum is going to allow us to share some key insights that we hope that program leaders and policymakers can really use to tackle future challenges and to be able to face the next or even continue with the equitable approach, that they can be agile and responsive and really more intentional about equity. The federal government provided $1.3 trillion in financial assistance to small businesses across the 4 economic stimulus bills, and that was funded through 12 programs. And these funds filtered down to states and local governments. And this graphic attempts to depict the types of funding and responses that we saw. And the first report provides a lot greater detail on this typology, and I am going to provide the link at the end of this presentation to both this report and the first report if you wanted to take a deeper dive into how we established this, this review of thinking through what types of business incentives we see state and locals offering. And to start you off, in the blue part of this graphic, it's showing the financial assistance type of incentives. If we think about what feds and state and locals are really doing to provide, from the left to the right, there's the category of debt. In general, we think about low interest loans. The Paycheck Protection Program was one that we are commonly seeing, and also microloans. In addition, the American Rescue Plan reauthorized the state small business credit initiative that was originally started in because of the Great Recession. And now it's $10 billion. And this is going to be a program that's now currently going out to states to help them fund and target the socially economic disadvantaged individuals who own businesses and very small businesses, those businesses with under 10 employees. And so this debt portion of SSBCI is going to help provide loan programs like loan guarantee and loan participation programs. And it's also trying to encourage states to work more closely with community development financial institutions and other community banks that are more likely to reach these types of businesses that are being impacted more heavily by the pandemic's effect. Moving up to the top of the graphic there, equity. Again, SSBCI funding can help states actually start venture capital funds if they choose to do so with their allocation. And then we also saw other innovative support programs. In terms of the other type of financial category, it's grants, basically, and these are really targeting those businesses who have less access to traditional banking or are underbanked and are less likely to want to take a loan. And so grants were utilized to fill that hole, and were more quickly pushed out with using the CARES Act and the American Rescue Plan. Continuing clockwise and looking at the orange section of the graphic, this is the services and technical assistance portion that we found that this is the type of programs that money was going out to help business owners be aware of funding options, working with community-based organizations that could help them get those businesses up and running, completing applications, making them aware. But also we saw some programs that really were trying to attempt to help businesses face the challenges of the pandemic, developing digital skills, online platforms, and market intelligence, which is helping businesses find what are their new market niches in this kind of continuing struggle with closings and openings or supply chains and those type of issues to help retain customers, but also find new customers. Finally, this green section is the fiscal type of tax or business incentive. And really what we saw is there's more of a temporary tax relief in terms of or fee deferrals, depending on the state and local tax structures. It could have been a sales tax holiday or some other type of unemployment insurance reimbursement, these types of things. The one thing that I would like to point out is that while there's many examples in the report that if you wanted to take a look at what some of the leading state and locals that we found in terms of equity approaches, really today I'm going to really highlight the kind of the issues around our key insights. Because in general, what we did was we found that there were efforts that seemed to go further in trying to distribute the funds equitably. And that programs were recognizing the fact that they really weren't necessarily reaching all businesses well. And many of the businesses were either unaware, perhaps there was some other type of barrier or challenge for them because of language or trust in government and programs coming through government. And what we saw, what we've seen in data as recently released even on the annual survey of businesses and the 2021 data, it indicated that BIPOC and women owners, as well as those from under-resourced communities, while they sought aid at higher levels of financial assistance, they received smaller levels of funding, had fewer number of actual receiving of grants or of other types of financial assistance, and they had lower shares of loan forgiveness. And so really with thinking about distributing funds equitably needs to take a look at this type of challenge that we have seen over the last few years. And with this in mind, programs are really trying to attempt to reach more diverse businesses through either their program criteria being much more culturally specific in terms of translating applications, culturally specific outreach and working with chambers and community organizations that are more likely to serve those type of businesses, being more location specific, where was the pandemic affecting more types of specific businesses of a certain kind, and then working with community banks and CDFIs and even fintech online lenders that were more likely to serve those type of owners. And as part of these efforts, the state and local programs are assessing equity, but as the next few examples are going to show, some of the data and the reporting really doesn't go far enough for us to understand how these funds are enabling these businesses to survive and prosper. So over the remainder of this presentation, I'm going to share our key insights from the review of the relief and recovery responses and provide some examples of how state and locals are trying to make strides to really address equity and inclusion issues. And our first key insight really tries to reflect that while programmatic equity and inclusion goals are essential in trying to thinking about reaching these types of businesses that are being more impacted by the pandemic and are less likely to have capital access, it's also important to remember that research has shown that when we actually are more thoughtful and intentional about including a wider group of our economy, we do better as growing our economy. And so this is really complementing our economic growth objectives. And that when we do this with the intention of really including a diverse group of entrepreneurs and small business owners, when we think about the development and design of programs, we can improve their actual ability to reach these types of businesses. And the first example that I wanted to share is Minnesota. Their Department of Employment and Economic Development established a goal in 2021 and through 2022 to reduce the disparities faced by people and businesses who really face systemic barriers to growth. And for the business part, they created annual equity goals for every program that focused on reducing disparities based on race, ability level, or geography. And for example, in the idea of metrics, they included included a goal of increasing the number of loans to Indigenous businesses and to emerging BIPOC-owned businesses. And Minnesota's reporting, even shown on this slide, is really thinking about from their small business relief program, how they're reflecting this commitment. And the app was translated into 4 languages that are more common in the Minnesota, in that state. And they reported details on grants by location and to the recipients by type of business, whether it was micro business, women-owned, BIPOC-owned, veteran-owned. And so they're trying to be more transparent and think about the types of ways that their programs can reach and be designed more intentionally for these types of businesses. Our second key insight really tries to get to the heart of, while we saw the idea that the American Rescue Plan has the requirement that states need to report on an equity use of their funds, it really didn't set guidance in terms of what types of metrics really needed to be reported. And this is really put the kind of the pressure back on the program designers to think through what would be an equitable outcome for their state or local program, which data needed to be collected, how could it be collected, and then how could it be reported. And so what we saw was there was large variation in how state and local governments really interpret the equitable recovery intention and intentions behind the policy design and their implementation. The example that I would like to share with you today is actually Vermont's economic recovery grants, which really provided the way that they were trying to figure out and understand if they were reaching their targets. So they had first set for the recovery grants, they set aside $2.5 million for women-owned businesses and $2.5 million for minority-owned businesses. And those businesses could only have 0 to 5 employees. And so the app was translated into 8 languages to enable a wider diversity of businesses to at least be able to have access to applying. They worked with community-based organizations to help those businesses that were likely, more or less likely to apply. And the results really indicated that 44% of women or minority-owned businesses received funding from the recovery grants. The set-aside goals were exceeded with $30 million, or 23% of the $131 million of total grant awards going to women and minority businesses. In addition, what I liked about Vermont is that they broke down more by gender and race. And so what we could see is that 6% of the recipients were minority women-owned businesses, and they received $4.4 million. And so this type of thoughtfulness in terms of thinking about, are we reaching our target? It's another stratification of the data or the disaggregation and understanding if we are actually reaching our target. Now, it still doesn't get to what the point we really need to think about is how are those businesses faring once we get the money into their hands? And that could help us design better programs. And so our third insight really tries to think about if we had better guidance on equity goals and metrics and data collection from the state and local government, how could we do better in terms of programs centering equity in the planning stage through the reporting stage to address these issues? And this would include an engagement of diverse organizations and business owners. And Fayetteville, North Carolina, took this to heart. They provide an example of how relief programs were modified because of listening to their community partners about the needs that diverse businesses were facing in their community. The city expanded their existing small business loan program to include an emergency $2,500 to up to $10,000 grant program. Second, to increase the equity aspect of the outreach for this small business loan programs grants, they actually removed the match requirement and they lowered their credit score requirement. And third, the city partnered with the Greater Fayetteville Chamber of Commerce and a nonprofit, the Center for Economic Empowerment and Development, to really target minority and women-owned businesses. And as a result, 96% of their recipients were minority-owned businesses and 60% were women-owned businesses. And finally, with the American Rescue Plan dollars, Fayetteville is now actually seeding a small business relief grant program for $50,000 for businesses with 200 employees or less. And this is also due to conversations and lessons from the loan programs at earlier efforts and further engagements with the businesses and community organizations. And as promised, here are the links to the 2 reports. And please do reach out to Ellen and me if you have any questions after the forum. But I really thank you for your time today. And I look forward to the conversation with our on-the-ground experts and further dialogue with everyone in the remainder time that we have.
With that, we're going to actually now hear from a few different programs from across the US. And so the first one that I want to introduce to you, or the first person that I want to introduce to you, is Mr. Andy Reid. He is International Trade and Incentives Program Manager with Prosper Portland, and he's going to tell us a little bit about the work in Portland. Go ahead, Andy. Nice to see you.
Thank you, Lauren. Thanks for having me today in this webinar. So I work at Prosper Portland. We're the Economic Development and Urban Development Agency for the City of Portland. And we focus on building equitable economies by carrying out a comprehensive range of programs, small business support, workforce training, and job creation for all of Portland's residents. I've come out of the field of workforce development, microenterprise development for 20 years. And most recently at Prosper Portland, I've been designing programs to engage small, medium, and large businesses to do public pledges. We found that companies are eager to engage with these questions of equity, and we look at growth and equity as kind of locked at the hip. And so we've got companies, about 130 companies representing more than 35,000 employees, that are working together with government and community to build localized public benefits. In addition to that, I've been teaching at Portland State for about 20 years on immigrant and refugee resettlement, workforce development, and international development. So it's been pretty good ride for the last few years. I'll put in the chat in a little bit a couple of the resources. One, the Public Pledge Program, Portland Needs Progress, and then some of our work around the topic of the day, the small business recovery work. And so I, kind of teeing this up, I thought it would be important to really go back to where this all started. 20 years ago, I would say, we began working across the city with a lot of nonprofits on the ground, kind of ground swelling ways to engage around poverty reduction. And what that looked like was the development of workforce programs as well as microenterprise development programs. And that came out of some really innovative money through HUD, Community Development Block Grant money, really designing long-term interventions around culturally specific communities. That meant not 6 months of interventions, but really 2 to 3 to 4 years of working with an individual on building out their plan. So they could, again, as we kind of called it before, do poverty reduction work. We've obviously shifted our language since then on a number of levels. This shifted in 2012. Prosper Portland, which used to be called the Portland Development Commission, really launched our first community economic development strategy. And this aligned with the work that was happening out of the community, the Economic Opportunity Initiative, as we called it, where small businesses were starting to get resourced in new ways. We all, again, realized our underserved communities really needed to see some good investment. That came in collaboration with the Aspen Institute, the Northwest Area Foundation. That led to a 2015 strategic plan. Feels like a century ago, but it was only, 7 years now? And at the center of that, we asked ourselves, who is benefiting from our budget? So we had about $300 million in our kind of portfolios to spend in the city. And in the past, we had moved those dollars in ways that were very inequitable. And so that 2015 strategy really leaned into creating a racial equity lens around making sure that the money moves and the resources move and the relationship moves in an anti-racist way, really kind of to describe it. So I don't want to take too much time on the backdrop, but I really feel it's important because if we're talking about the small business relief work, my hope is, I'm going to drop this in the chat immediately, or maybe Lauren, if you could do that for me. Oh, it's not going in there. We'll figure out another way to do this. The Small Business Relief Fund came out of that 20 years of investment in the community, as well as our work collectively saying, how do we do this better? So when the pandemic hit, we initially released $1 million of general fund money. In the volume of applicants, it was a 3-day window. It generated almost 9,000 applications. We handed out a couple hundred grants to small businesses, 289 to be specific. That led to a second round. That round saw another 4,500 applicants. And what was really cool about this thing, kind of going back to the history of how we've designed our programming, is the applicants that were screened in partnership with our communities of color, our culturally specific chambers of commerce. Communities made the decision where the money would go, which was a much different model than we had used in the past, where, program manager with maybe an advisory board would make a decision. We were at the table with 5 to 10 different nonprofits deciding where the money was going to go. And that made it, when you look at the numbers, and again, we'll drop the link in the chat here, it made it a very good process for us to be able to say we centered equity in this work. What came out of that was CARES Act, ARPA dollars, and that kind of built on the back. Oops, there's my timer, sorry about that. That built on the back of that earlier work. Some innovative things that came out of that, we were able to design a small business hub. We'll put that online. That just came out this week as well, using some ARPA money. We also created a new film and video and events office to, again, support the BIPOC community to get into a pretty important industry here in Portland. The thing that I'm probably most proud of is, as a result of doing all this work with our culturally specific chambers, they have collectively brought in $32 million in the last couple of years, going from just $1 million. So they've 32 times being able to move money into their communities because they were able to demonstrate and show how they can work collectively with government to impact the communities that they serve most. So I think I'm at my 5 minutes. We'll hand it back off. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Andy, and great to hear about your work in Portland, and we'll make sure that we get those links. And I'm going to kick it over now to Katie Johnson, who is a partner at Next Street, and she's going to be sharing a little bit more about the work that's happening in Illinois and the Chicago region. And go ahead, Katie, we look forward to hearing from you.
Thanks so much. Yeah, my name is Katie Johnson, and I'm a partner at Next Street, which is a mission-driven firm with the goal of helping small businesses across the country realize their full potential and boundless opportunity. So we do this by designing and implementing solutions that connect entrepreneurs and small business owners with the right resources at the right time for them. And we do strive to be an anti-racist organization. My background personally is in strategy consulting and the social impact sector. So I love bringing both of those lenses, both the strategy and the impact to the work. And I'm here today also as a partner of the Cook County Small Business Source, formerly known in the COVID recovery land as the Cook County COVID Recovery Small Business Assistance Program, for which Next Street is the program coordinator. This program launched in mid-2020 with the goal of reaching BIPOC, women, and other small business owners who've been historically excluded from government programs with business advising, sometimes called technical assistance, and within that services bucket that I think Darrene mentioned within her remarks, and capital programs, some of those financial supports. The program has been successful in achieving this to date. Since 2020, the program has provided capital, technical assistance, and capacity building to more than 10,000 small businesses. 72% of the businesses served in the program are BIPOC owned, and 76% are micro businesses with 5 or fewer employees. And we credit this due to the strong community support and design from our vast partner network, which is more or less a hub and spoke network of over 30 organizations locally. And also by design, we sought to integrate equity and inclusion as a core premise of the program. This was intentional based on the priorities of the Cook County government, based around its racial equity policy and action plan, as well as coming out of a shared ecosystem assessment in 2018 and 19 that Next Street drove in collaboration with CRF, Chicago Community Trust, JPMorgan Chase, and the Polk Brothers Foundation, which built up local nonprofit and funder coalitions that were ready to act when the needs arose in COVID. So key partners such as the Chicago Urban League, the Illinois Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, the Women's Business Development Center, as well as many others, helped us to accomplish that goal in both designing the program as well as implementing it on an ongoing basis. We built this program together, and we also use shared resources and reporting to better understand our collective impact and where the needs are. Further, the success of the program has also encouraged Cook County to make an unprecedented, really $37 million commitment to small businesses, which includes both capital and service programs. And in addition to our work on the source, the county is also examining opportunities to direct businesses to new customers through inclusive procurement processes and innovative capital streams, all really strong examples of how to not only serve small businesses, but to support an equitable and inclusive recovery, but also just go deeper on that commitment beyond COVID recovery. And we at Next Street are working to bring similar innovative solutions to other communities across the country. We've performed those ecosystem assessments that I referenced earlier in over 25 communities nationwide, which really we think helps set some of the groundwork that we were able to act upon, able to get a lot of different nonprofit, government, philanthropic groups to the table to look at the data, look at small business needs and what small businesses were saying they needed, really align on key priorities to push forward as a community, as a city, or a community more specifically, and then set up coalitions to help drive that work forward. So really excited to be here today and to learn from the other panelists.
Thank you so much, Katie. And we can share some of the resources around that work. And there's also actually a Kauffman article, Ecosystems in Action, that reviews and chronicles a lot of the story that Katie was just talking about. So we can also put that in the chat as well. Our final presenter is Ms. Tara Palacios, who is the Director of Small Business at Arlington Economic Development and Arlington County Government. And she'll be sharing with us a little bit about what's happening in her neck of the woods and the Equitable program details that they've tried to implement there. Thank you so much, Tara.
Thank you, Lauren. And hello and good afternoon, everyone. I am so excited to be here talking about something that is near and dear to our hearts, which is helping small businesses succeed. We all hear about small businesses and how they're the backbone of our community, and it is true. And so if they're healthy, that means our communities are healthy. And so as a person, an economic development professional, I've been with Arlington County Economic Development for a little over 20 years. And throughout that time, we're always trying to build programming, build things that really assist our businesses to be able to live the American dream of starting their own business, building wealth within their communities, and really sustainability. And we're always trying to figure out, and I know this is happening across the country, how can we better do that? And I think with the pandemic, I talk about how the cards kind of fell. You know, we were living in a house of cards where you have this idea, you cut the lights on and you start. Well, with the pandemic, it really altered the way access to capital was extremely important, being able to get funding to survive. We heard a tremendous amount from our businesses. How can we get access to capital? We can't access PPP or EIDL. We're looking to be creative. We know we have to pivot and we need help. So one of the things that we did was we polled our community and said, if not for grant programs, PPP or EIDL, what would you use the funds for if you were able to get funding? And a lot of it went back to marketing themselves, being able to sell online, being able to do e-commerce. So we were able to quickly pivot. We talked to our friends around the DC metro region. What are things that you all are doing? What are things that are working? How can we best help our community who didn't have the tools and resources to be able to pivot quickly and then to take cash that they didn't have to put into build an e-commerce platform? And that's where our relaunch program was born. And I'm so excited to be able to share the work that we've been able to do with that program, because in the back of our mind the entire time is, how do we reach our BIPOC community? How do we reach our legacy businesses, which are really hard to communicate to or with during a pandemic where we're all kind of isolated and sheltering at home, to help them be able to compete online? Many times we heard from our business owners, oh, you know, I have this brick and mortar store, I'm not interested in going online, you know, I've got my clientele. But with the pandemic, we learned this isn't happening. People aren't buying goods and services the way they used to. So we started to talk to a lot of our close friends in the private sector. We'd been doing a lot of work with Amazon Web Services. We've been talking to different friends around the region. And so we built this program called Relaunch, where we could build trust within the business community and go to them and say, hey, if we could provide you with the tools and resources and underwrite that using our Rescue Act fund money, CARES Act fund money, would this be something that you would be interested in doing? So for the last year, we piloted the program. We worked with a company out of Boston called RevB, and we work with friends that are AWS partners, Nub8, that are in Miami. And even though we're in DC, because we're virtual, we were able to create this program which brings together all of these different resources to be able to help our small businesses. How did we outreach to them? Y'all, we use yard signs. We did promotions and, in church groups and in different community sectors. We thought outside of the box as to how can we reach folks and get them to communicate with us so that we could get them into this program, provide technical assistance, help them to design an e-commerce tool, even if they are novices. We also did dual language with the program. So if you didn't speak English, we would be able to find a provider to be able to help you walk you through this section. So it's, as a community, building trust within the entrepreneurs that are in need of assistance and help, being able to use our dollars as we try to expand, because we ran out of grant money. So we were able to stand up 2 grants, but then we had some seed money. And so what could we do with that seed money that would have a tremendous impact so that people could reposition themselves so that they could compete? The new and interesting thing is, to me, being able to work with private sector as a public sector person, being able to work with private sector to come up with creative solutions. I will not say the work is not easy. It's not easy, but when you are able to make impact with people that also have a mission and vision of helping others and understanding where those people are at any given time, because people were scared and they continue to be, because this new environment is so different and you have to be able to adapt to still be able to compete. And so I found that the most interesting part was, as a local government official, thinking outside the box to create something that the private sector would be able to respond to be able to get help. And the thing I'm most proud of, and I think we are all in this work, in local, state, federal government work, because we want to help others. It's not always about, the big salaries and the juiciness of that, but it's about being able to see someone that's suffering, that needs help, being able to provide them with that proper tool that then empowers them to go on and to build wealth and sustainability within their community, especially someone that's not used to someone responding to them, whether it's a language barrier, whether it's a trust factor. We've gone through so much the last few years, and I think trust, empathy, grace, and compassion. We also went through rebuilding our own website, and it was a challenge, much less having someone that may not understand the fine tuning of it all and how do you lift up this website. And so to be able to see that aha moment in their eyes was priceless. This is a program that I would love to share with everyone as something that it doesn't have to cost a tremendous amount of money, but it has the biggest impact. Some of our clients, because they're now online, they no longer just have an Instagram account. They have a fully cyber secure, fully functioning SEO engine, search engine. People can find them, and they've gone viral, and they've gotten business outside of just their brick and mortar store. So to be able to do that type of work that we do, and to be on the ground and to see the impact that you have with the community is just priceless. And so one of the things I will say, right before we started today, I heard from IEDC, the International Economic Development Program, and we won an award for this program relaunch. And so I just want to thank our partners who I know are here today and putting this together, as well as my friends around the region, because it really takes a village of all of us coming together to figure out how we can create impact and programs that are for the long term and that lift up our communities. And so I'm really looking forward to the panel discussion as well.
Well, with that, we will welcome everyone back, as well as Ellen Harper, who we haven't spoken yet with from Smart Incentives. And we're going to kick off Wonderful. Okay, we're all here. So we're going to kick off a series of panel discussion, or excuse me, of discussions about the 3 key insights. And I'm going to place the 3 key insights in the chat so that you can kind of have those as you're listening. And the conversation is going to flow through reflecting with these folks on each of those. And I know I've heard that maybe our chat is disabled, so we're going to work on that in the background so that we can make sure to hear from everyone listening today. And with that, I'm going to actually just kick it over to you, Ellen. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lauren, and thank you, Tara, Katie, and Andy for joining us today and for sharing your stories. These are wonderful stories. You're some of the best people in the business, and we're so happy that you're here and willing to take your time to discuss with us and share your stories with everyone who's trying to move in the directions that you are moving. And congratulations, Tara, on the IEDC award. That's wonderful news. Just another thing I wanted to mention, I have seen your yard signs. I love those. I took pictures of them. They're fabulous. So we want to have a great conversation today. I have so many things I'm interested in following up with everyone on, and we do encourage you, again, when the chat's functioning, to add your questions to it too, because we want to make this as much a conversation with as many people as we can involve as possible. But I am going to start it off with a question about the first insight that was that Darrene discussed in her presentation, and that's about including diverse groups of entrepreneurs and small business owners in the development of programs in order to improve their design and make them more effective, as well as more equitable and inclusive. And everyone, Katie, Andy, and Tara, you all discussed different ways that your groups went about approaching this, and some overlap and some different pieces that I hope we'll dive into. And Katie, I'd like to start with you because it sounded like you had, especially starting with those ecosystem assessments, a real process for understanding the perspectives of a variety of types of business owners. But then I'm kind of interested if you can tell us a little bit about that, but also the mechanics then of moving from that to actual programs, because that's a pretty big leap for a lot of groups. So Katie, what can you tell us?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, just a little bit about those ecosystem assessments. It is a combination of more quantitative data, things like census data, things like that, local state data, as well as qualitative data. So what are business owners in the communities actually saying about the capital and service landscape around them, and what do they need, and what are sort of opportunities and what are barriers to access. We also sort of get the perspective of capital and service providers too, just to kind of understand what might be going on there. And then often we sort of bring those different folks together. Some entrepreneurs are invited to the table, service providers, capital providers, government, depending on exactly the configuration of the community. Often a government entity and or other philanthropic entities might be at the table to all kind of hear some of these different results that come about and prioritize solutions that they want to move forward with, as well as a way to move forward through some sort of governance process. In the Cook County area, that process was called the Chicago Inclusive Growth Coalition that prioritized 3 specific initiatives to move forward on. And again, that was set up in sort of by 2019-ish, such that when the pandemic happened in 2020, basically got on the phone with all of those folks that had been involved and said, what do businesses need at this point in time? And sort of with that multi-stakeholder coalition group, determined that some of the biggest needs, and this was back in the time of PPP and all of sort of the loan work early on. So grants and navigation of those different grant, of the different capital opportunities. How do you apply? What are all these things? What are all the initials? And also just general recovery systems. How do you pivot your business model if you need to be online? Things like that really rose to the top as ideas. And then we built out sort of a proof of concept to some extent about how to serve those needs with a subset of those sort of entrepreneur support organizations, ESOs, as well as actually some of the philanthropic community, the Chicago Community Trust and the Harpel Foundation also sort of served as folks to bounce those ideas off of. From there, we went out and were able to get both philanthropic support as well as Cook County support for this idea, and we're able to launch it within that year, with especially with grant funds from the county to actually get out to the small businesses, which was the sort of vast amount of our funding went in that direction. So that was sort of how the evolution of how the program stood up. And then there's also just how did we actually get some of that input, and for the details behind that, I think the entrepreneur involvement often was through focus groups. We also involved them in partner selection for the business advising partners that are in our network to review those applications. And then we also get feedback loops on an ongoing basis through things like satisfaction forms, understanding sort of program impact on their business and the like that result in program improvements. And then specifically, what are some of the ways that some of the results from that we've seen? I would say are, from an outreach perspective, we do have neighborhood-based organizations that often have the relationships with the community, bringing entrepreneurs into programs, really gaining awareness. We've done some other more centralized marketing. I love the yard sign idea was one that we ended up more with sort of some radio ads and some of those different pieces. From a capital design perspective, we've had increasingly user-friendly applications and documentation requirements. We have some upcoming capital programs that we're hoping to be able to leverage with those. And from an advising services standpoint, there's a growing set of resources and partners to support the variety of needs that we've seen come up through some of those different feedback loops, as well as just the changing conditions that we're all living in today.
Thank you, Katie. You mentioned one thing I just want to pull out for a second, because we found it important in our work, is this idea of redesigning forms and making the requirements and the application process more user-friendly. It's an easy win for a lot of communities. If they take a step back and kind of look at some of their paperwork, you can probably make a pretty big difference by doing that to a lot of potential applicants. So but all of that is very interesting, and I'm hoping we'll come back to a couple of those other points as well.
One other thing that I would be remiss, I think, in that sort of capital access piece, I sort of take it for granted that the combination of the coaching and the capital together of how are you releasing these applications and actually helping businesses to apply for them and helping them to understand, making the best use of it for their business, or just thinking through even tax implications and things like that. And so, thinking about the long-term impact there. So I do think that that's a particularly innovative approach that in and of itself embeds E&I into that perspective.
Great, thank you. Tara, in your presentation, you talked about polling the community as a way, but I also know that you've been doing this and your department's been doing this for a long time. So you probably are doing that on a base of a pretty strong set of relationships. But so maybe talk about both a little bit, using those relationships, but maybe the specific polling mechanism that helped you design programs for relaunch.
It was, we had thoughts about how we could have inclusivity and make sure that we had everybody participating. And so, but we wanted to make sure, just like a business makes sure that, they understand their community and they're surveying and doing focus groups, we needed to do the same for our community, because just because you hear things that are out there, we wanted to ensure. And so we worked with our market research team within our economic development office so that we could see consistency over time throughout the pandemic. So as soon as we had the stay-at-home orders in place in March the 13th, why do I remember that date? But as soon as that date rolled around, we issued our first survey that first week. And then we ended up issuing 4 more surveys from then to see how things changed over time. And we started pushing out to people and having people self-select to sign up, so that when a survey would come up, or if they wanted information on the COVID-19 pandemic, and to be the first to know. We also realized, and this was something that I was just thinking about after hearing Katie speak, was we were very concerned that the application process itself would also be kind of off-putting for people. When I mentioned the house of cards, a lot of our businesses did not realize necessarily that they needed a business license. we received everything but a business license. And when you're applying for some of the federal programs, you have to make sure that you're compliant on the local level. So because people had done all their homework and they did the federal and maybe the state stuff, they're paying their sales and retail tax, they did not get the business license. So it made them ineligible. And so as part of all this, we started doing education to let people know. And we also made our applications very simplistic so that people could do the application on their phone and then upload a copy of their business license. And most of our entrepreneurs have phones if the digital divide is real. And so, but we wanted to be as inclusive as possible. So throughout that entire process, we surveyed them, we questioned them, but we kept everything simple. We tried to take off that local government hat and the government speak and just make it so that it was very easy. We also did a lot of communication in multiple languages, especially with our grant programs. We did in Arlington, we have a large Ethiopian population, so Amharic as well as Spanish and English were our main modes of communication, just to make sure that we were reaching as many people as possible.
Thank you, Tara. Again, more great stories, more great insights. Andy, we'd love to hear from you on this. Again, you did talk about building on 20 years of activity and relationships that have been developed, and how the community helped decide where the dollars would go. Are there other details that you can share with us about exactly how that process worked, or how kind of the mechanisms for obtaining for using that input to design the programs and that actually were put into place?
Yeah, Tara, that I'm having those flashbacks to getting phone calls from people. So as a team, we have about 20 people that worked on this across the city, and we had a list of just remembering. We had a list of people with specific languages that could answer the phone if a small business reached out. There were thousands of calls and emails that came in, and we had to triage all of those. And so we'd pick up the phone and just kind of work through our call list, and it was a beautiful thing to just really connect with people. So there was a lot of that kind of early on, really direct communication from government. The thing that we use is we use a JOT form to track applications as well. Again, Tara, to your point, like really trying to make it as user friendly and easy as possible. Sending things out in multiple languages, going through our communities of color, and that was really the hallmark of what made this work successful to us. Is we had not only our culturally specific chambers, so the Filipino American Chamber, African American Chamber, Hispanic Metropolitan Chamber. All these organizations were already staffed and ready to go, and so it made it much easier for us to do a block grant to them, and then they could release funds. So that's one method that we used, which was a pretty fast way to get the money out into the street. And then second, that direct kind of grant to the community members, to the small businesses. We have a lending team, and we have a grant team as well. So we already had that internal infrastructure to be able to move money, understanding federal regulations, using, again, community development block grant. Different money, obviously, but understanding kind of the frameworks of government and how that money flows. And then the other thing that I think was relevant in designing and organizing this work, I just put in the chat, another part of our programming, which is really, this is the core of our community economic development work. We use what's called the Inclusive Business Resource Network. And it's a series of nonprofits that work with about 1,000 small businesses across the city. This network does everything from the small business 101, how to develop out a business plan, to getting into e-commerce, to what have you, to an a la carte model where we have a small business legal clinic that can help negotiate leases, for example. And so we pay one of our local colleges, Lewis and Clark, to help manage with students that are about to graduate with their law degrees, focusing on supporting BIPOC-owned businesses to make sure they don't sign a bad lease, let's just say. And so the network in that system, all of those groups fed into the decision-making, and they fed into the decision-making through kind of historic, what do we know, what works, and who needs the resource. And so it made it, I'm not going to say easy, but easier to make decisions on where to move the money. We had outstanding contracts, I'm going to say, with 10 to 15 different nonprofits and chambers that we could, again, just immediately leverage. Made it so much easier because we already had all the paperwork done. We already knew who they were. We already knew what they could produce. We already had outcome reports on various levels of how they've done interventions within the small business community. So I don't know if that answers your question, Ellen, but that's kind of a bit more about the ecosystem of how we engaged.
Very helpful. Great, Andy. And Prosper Portland has so many good programs, and this is another one. So please check out that link about the Inclusive Business Resource Network. And I think one of my takeaways from this conversation is, everyone has to start somewhere. Not every community is where your three organizations are, but starting to build early and not just like, okay, today's the day we're going to do a program. That's probably not going to be as effective as building these relationships and sustaining them over time. And that's a commitment that, as you all have done and demonstrated, needs to be sustained. So now, Lauren, are there other questions from the audience, or should we go to Darrene?
I think we can continue, and I'll continue to see if anything else bubbles up. So go ahead.
All right, thanks. Darrene?
Okay, great. I'm loving the way this is coming together, because as each of you were speaking, I was like, ooh, that's going to fit here. Ooh, that's going to fit here. And now there's too much to be able to do. And so the excitement that Tara, you brought, though, in terms of like, we're putting out yard signs and to the effect of like thinking about these ways that we don't necessarily think about communicating as government, or as even, I think, nonprofits sometimes, right? We serve the people we serve, we know how to serve them, but how do we come together with other nonprofits to actually, be able to be not redundant and serve a greater good, if you will. So I'm going to turn to you first, though, and thinking about our insight number 2, and thinking about how program designers really need to think about, do they need more guidance from federal and state governments in terms of thinking about development of reporting metrics? And you were talking about the fact that, you were surveying and you were, kind of going back and forth and adjusting your program. But when you think about the reporting and you actually go back to, the county government to say, this is what our program's done, or this is the type of impact that we have, what is your number one challenge in thinking about like reporting on equity inclusion? And then, if there was better guidance from, whether it was the CARES Act fund or the American Rescue Plan, or even the county, what type of guidance on reporting on equity inclusion would help for your programs?
And that, I think classically, I so appreciate that question, because it's something that we struggle with quite a bit. Is how to do the after, and doing economic development for so long, it's something that we struggled with for years, because sometimes we'll have clients who do not want, even though when we did the grants and we said, could you self-report and let us know your ethnicity, race, background, industry, we had people that I knew were of color that refused to answer that. And so the quality of the types of information that we can get from people, I always take it with a grain of salt, because I do believe it also has to do with a trust factor and building trust within the communities. They feel if I do self-identify in that way, then it may prohibit me from opportunities or being able to access capital because of some of the historical things that have happened and that continue to happen. So because we know our clients so well, we're able to fill in those gaps, but that isn't like a consistent over time solution. I firmly believe that. I am wondering if there is a way on the federal and state sides, and also, and I know this might be pie in the sky, y'all. I know I'm asking for pie in the sky, but what I would really love is metrics that is across the country. So that as we're doing these programs, if Katie, Andy, and I are all using the same metrics, then you could see what the impact of the program development is. And then you could start to benchmark that way, because half the battle for me is to say, I know this program has impact, but if my numbers are squishy, people will kind of look at it and say, well, how do you really know? And so that's the battle that I've experienced over the 20 some odd years. I won't say how long I've been in economic development, is, well, how do you know empirically that this program is providing you the results that it is providing? And that's a challenge that we have, I think, with the surveys and trying to provide the consistencies. But a lot of the programs that we've been able to do, it's because of federal funding. It's because of what we received from, the ARPA dollars and the CARES dollars. But then when we report back to our local government, that we report back to the state and then to the federal, it's not going to be, apples to apples, oranges to oranges. And so the opportunity I see is if we could have kind of a national way of reporting these numbers and the use of these funds, so that when we're crafting these programs, there is the ability to make it so that it is more empirical, if that sounds like, that's my wish list. That's what I would love to have.
So we should quickly, everybody just have to poll. So I would give you a thumbs up on that. So I appreciate I like pie in the sky. I mean, I think if we don't set the bar high enough, what would we do? And I do believe that you see the inconsistency across programs, right? That, a lot of workforce monies will come through from the feds, and the state will just have the same metrics, and that the locals are doing more, and we could actually build better grassroots approach back up. And I think we see this in a lot of programs. And yeah. Andy, you said something to the effect of like having the block grants go out. And so I'm assuming, block grants and the way that money was distributed possibly had some reporting issues, or and possibly maybe a little bit, if we could think about the equity inclusion part, when it came back to your city government, or, because I believe that was you're saying pre-COVID federal and state dollars, correct?
Yeah, and let me peel it back just for a second. Further, and we've been struggling with, I think, Tara, you were getting to this, if somebody's unwilling to document their status, maybe they have their IEN, but they don't have even documentation to work in the United States. So you have those kinds of situations. You have moments, again, where we just don't necessarily have clean data because they're not federally registered as a minority-owned business or women-owned business. We have a state program that does it as well, but it's clunky. It's hard to get in. We have been really trying to figure out how do you get to a moment where you can say, with sincerity, like, this business is owned by a person of color, and not be a gatekeeper, but be a gate opener, is kind of we're describing it. And that's a hard question. Like, that's a hard question to really understand. And maybe others are smarter on this than we are and have figured that out. But we're not there yet. So in terms of reporting out, again, we have our community development block grant, HUD money. We've had that as a framework coming through. We owe $1 on the workforce side. We know how to play that game. We know how to move the reporting back to the federal government on those different pieces. City Council has given us a little bit more latitude to do that, because, again, it's, if it's unrestricted general fund money, we don't have as much of that kind of federal kind of oversight necessarily. We're going to be a little bit more innovative. I would say that aligning across the country would be great, and really kind of tackling this question of what about the groups that you can't necessarily they're not in the systems, because for a lot of reasons they're not in the systems. The second layer that we've talked about this a little bit, Darrene and Ellen, and that is on the corporate communities trying to answer the same question. They're trying to figure out from the ESG, environmental social governance side, what is S? How do we do S? How do you document social impact? And there's trillions of dollars moving into this space, right? And so I feel like government and community and business should be at the table designing this together. And what if, pie in the sky, again, thank you, Tara. What if those three kind of groups figured it out together, because we're working with the same communities. You know, a Walmart or Amazon Web Services or Dollar Trucks North America, they have the same pain point that government does. And it feels like there could be a chance to move those or align those conversations at some, probably, maybe it's already happening. I don't know, but maybe I pivoted too much. Sorry, Darrene.
No, that's perfect, because I think that when we're talking about these types of, you know, we want government, you know, we want government to have good relationships with our corporate sector, and we want our corporate sector and those private businesses to create better jobs, right? Living wage, you know, quality jobs, quality pathways. And so more of that thinking about social kind of impact needs to kind of filter through that type of, you know, business bottom line, if you will, right? That in being inclusive and equitable actually is good for the economy. And one thing I haven't heard quite yet, and I think that part of it's because both Ellen and I are working on the state small business credit initiative as kind of examining state applications, and the demographics that are supposedly going to be collected or part of the interim rule at this point in time also includes LGBTQ. And so and there's a lot of discussion about whether people will want to report or not report. And so I ask, and Katie, I would like to ask you, but I'm not sure if you actually have an example, but in terms of where you were working in Cook County, did these types of equity inclusion with LGBTQ and other types of aspects when you're doing your business needs assessments and the ecosystem assessment come up or rise up?
Yeah, they absolutely did. I mean, and we also think about, you know, members of the low to moderate income communities more specifically. I think in Cook County, there were ways to measure COVID impact that factored in income, as well as COVID impact and different things like that, that helped to prioritize some of the initial grant distribution. You know, veteran-owned businesses, I know is a big piece that we want to also ensure. And then also just within specific community groups, we know that the Hispanic or Latino community has had less access than potentially other people of color within some of the local grants. And so it's definitely not a monolith of like, all, you know, all small business owners and some of the issues. I did just want to speak to also to some of the issues, because I 100% agree with having some alignment across the government, but all resources, you know, within the Cook County program, for example, we were a hub within the state of Illinois Community Navigator program that was, I think, referenced in the report. And so aligning the metrics of what Cook County was reporting with what the state of Illinois was reporting, which were similar, but not quite the same, you know, meant a lot of different reporting requirements for our nonprofit partners, as in addition to our businesses. So I just wanted, I do agree with that. However, at the same time, I also want to acknowledge that there are programmatic differences in how programs might be administered or some of their goals, especially within the service realm, you know, things that people are trying to achieve. And so we're talking a lot here today about demographics and almost just sort of like information about the recipients and how much capital maybe they've received, which I think for capital programs is a really important first step. But I'm also really curious about the long-term outcomes of some of these programs and how are we comparing those. And I think those are a lot harder to potentially set universally in the same way. So potentially it's kind of a both and solution for some of that sort of uniformity in certain types of metrics. Are we looking for business advising sessions or number of businesses in business advising? Are we looking for number of door knocks or door knocks and phone banking? You know, just like little things like that could actually be really, they're very tactical, but could be really helpful to be on the same page about versus, you know, maybe some of the longer term pieces might be slightly different. So I just want to address that. At the same time, I going back to sort of what folks want to report on and don't want to report, I think we see some of those same issues about different groups being more or less likely to report on some of their demographic or other groups. I would say one thing that we've done to try to counter this, I think, is in the way that we talk about the program and trying to give access to those groups and specifically naming those groups as ones that we want to give access to. And I think using sort of trusted advisors within those communities to help people sign up. So those are a couple of the things that we've done to try to sort of overcome some of those barriers. I will say though, trying to collect follow-up data from really busy business owners or too much data up front is a real barrier to their application itself. And so I think those are just like constant things that we're trying to navigate.
That comment is very much appreciated because we always try to call upon, we want to be able to track the business success to see if this actually had an impact, right? But again, that how much more burden is that upon the business who's just trying to think about growing or, you know, dealing with supply chains or whatever that is. But as the data people, we would like to see it because I do think it's like, should we be doing door knocks or should we be doing phone banks or should we be actually giving more ability for services to be evaluated, which service is better, right? Like what is actually having a better impact. So, all right. Well, with that, I think I want to turn it back over to Ellen for our third insight conversation.
Right, great. Well, we're going to stick with the theme of metrics for this one. So this insight is about how the tracking of equity and inclusion metrics should be paired with purposeful program design and feedback loops. So we've talked about design and we've talked about metrics. Now we're going to talk about kind of bringing the two together. And Andy, I'm going to start with you, kind of a two-parter here, because Katie brought up kind of other types of outcome metrics that we care about. And I know this is something you've spent a lot of time thinking about. So we'd love to hear from you about that. But then also how you're using all of these metrics to make program course corrections as you find that they're needed. Now we're in a different economic environment than we were 2 years ago, and we're going to be in a different environment in 2 more years, but the needs, you know, to support business will stay the same. So how can metrics help feed back into the programs and kind of continue to make them make useful and do better as they go along?
Thank you, Ellen, for the question. Yeah, we gratefully had Smart Incentives working with our team on doing some metrics design using an equity lens. One of the things, I'm just going to give a shout out to Carlos Delgado on, and I saw he's in the chat here. We use, if you haven't done this yet, looked at the results-based accountability framework on how to track your data. Why this is so, I think it's really innovative in the way that I think it's innovative is it forces us out of the output conversation, how many businesses were served, who was served, to was anybody better off as a result of it? Like, and that is, I think Katie, you were just talking about this, right? Like that is the hard question. How do we know anybody was better off because of our work that we did? And then that kind of shifts, again, pulling back, like how do you design programs that, how do we know people are better off? So on the traded sector side, so businesses that are selling goods and services outside of our city, we're now using basically two levels to track this data. One is around growth. Are they growing? And how do we know that they're growing? We can look at job creation. We can get that data pretty easily. We could look at revenue, but we don't really usually go there. Usually if we're targeting towards the jobs, and that kind of tells the story for us, we can then kind of work our way backwards on what the benefit back is to the city or the state on income tax, for example. You know, Oregon at 7.9% times 100 jobs. That's great. We can tell the growth story. The inclusivity story is a little bit harder. That's where companies can tell us, have we become more inclusive? And there are ways to get to that data. But having those paired together around the growth and the inclusion has been really our way of showing that impact, using metrics directly from companies reporting to us through a number of different methods. That tells us whether or not we're growing an inclusive economy, not just an economy. So that's directly from the company base. The metrics process of really kind of figuring out how to tell that story to our city council, to our stakeholders, to others, that's another level, and that's really the storytelling side. I think with RBA, results-based accountability, we've come to the understanding that when you talk about metrics, it is the data. Obviously, we want to make sure that we have numbers to back up what happened, but it really is going to be that soft, qualitative analysis of what actually happened. It feels like that is the piece that always moves money in the end of the day. It's not going to be the number. We can say $200 million spent with BIPOC-owned businesses. Great, congratulations, we did good. That's important. We need to say that. But when we can get a company sitting next to a community member, next to a small business, talking about building supply diversity, tier 1, tier 2 programming, that's what's going to move our city council and others to invest further. So again, I don't know if I answered your question, Ellen, but.
That's great. Thank you, Andy. Katie, I think you specifically mentioned feedback loops in your remarks. I wonder if you can tell us a little bit more about how those play out in the communities where you're working and the processes that you use to make that happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there's kind of both the quantitative side of how are we continuing to collect satisfaction and impact surveys from participants and use those within dashboards that we review every couple of weeks with our nonprofit partners, just to see, you know, are businesses getting contacted quickly enough, you know, just some of the user experience pieces, as well as some of the impact pieces of the program and what are they needing at this point in time. And so there's some of that we use, as well as the conversations with the nonprofit network. And so we have calls every 2 weeks with our network of nonprofit providers to kind of understand what challenges folks are running, you know, what questions are they commonly getting from small businesses, how can we support each other in some of the different pieces that come up, as well as just supporting each other through some reporting requirements and some of these different things that we're talking about here, answering basic questions. And then we have on more of like a less frequent basis, we'll continue to engage focus groups and things like that. And so we had focus groups in the fall of 2020 that sort of specifically asked about small business needs. We had small business owners engaged in different partner selection conversations during 2021, and are kind of thinking about that now, how to best engage different community groups through the design of an upcoming grant program that's kind of getting socialized and designed by a number of different stakeholder groups now. So just thinking about sort of how we're bringing all those different pieces together.
If I can stay with you for Katie for a second for a follow-up, and then Tara, I'm going to ask the same question of you. Katie, you talked about user experiences and impact experiences. What do you do when they're different? You know, like if like users love it, but it's really expensive or it's hard to sustain, or, you know, how do you navigate that?
That's a great question. I think there's luckily to date, there's been a strong will to be able to provide some of these services. And so I just want to say that I think the commitment on behalf of the partners, including the Cook County government, I think has been really strong to be able to sort of pilot different solutions and see what works. And so that commitment has been really strong. We are sort of looking though at what programs do the best of both, you know, and so understanding sort of where is there both satisfaction as well as impact is sort of our goal. So how do we use this to pilot innovative things and then also learn from them and implement them quickly? So that's sort of our aspiration, is to both be innovative, which sometimes results in things that are more or less effective, but then kind of targeting the ones that are kind of the best of both worlds as a whole.
Thank you, Katie. Tara, I'd love your point of view on this whole idea of metrics that help continually improve and redesign the program, but also this tension between, you know, maybe user experiences and impact experiences. What do you see?
So I think something that's been really helpful for us is that we are constantly surveying and seeing where we are with the program. We started out with some assumptions. We thought, oh, this is quite transparent and people really don't get this. And then the reality was, hey, and so what we ended up doing with our partners was continually making improvement. So we gave ourselves a longer time to pilot what the activities were, so that as we went along and we realized, you know, our clients really don't understand X or Y, how can we make this simpler? How can we tweak what we're doing so that as we onboard them, they understand the expectations from the get-go? Because initially what was happening, and I don't know if the other, my other two friends experiences, but we started getting people ghosting us because the level of information and what they had to provide was complicated. And I'm like, wait a minute, I'm not dating you guys. Don't ghost me. but let's find out how we can make this simpler so that you can be engaged in a shorter length of time, and so that it's not a heavy lift, so that you can continue running and managing your business. And because we were constantly focused in on making improvements to the program and improving and making things simplistic, it really helped us. So now we're able to build a pipeline. People are referring others. It's just building up this kind of domino effect. Whereas I think had we stayed stuck, Ellen, to your question, and we kept kind of jamming a square peg into a round hole, it would have been very costly and expensive. And so because we were able to go back and tweak the program and make the improvements that we needed, and working with the private sector made it so that we could make these changes. It was painful at times for all of us, but we could tweak it and make it better. And so now I feel like we're at the point where it's really coming together, and we can onboard people, give them the experience that they need, and then be able to go away so that they can practice. But then we've also told folks that if you need, we've helped you with X, but if you need assistance with Y, reapply for the program and we'll continue to help until you, because sometimes we may identify an issue that a business owner has, but then something else may pop up, and we need to make sure that holistically we can assist them. And so I think that's really important, especially I know it's hard for governments to come by funding to do new and innovative programming. But I think if we give ourselves grace and say, okay, this isn't working, but if we tweak that to make this kind of fit, especially with our key stakeholders, our elected officials and others, but be very transparent about the process, I think it strengthens the work that we're doing.
That's such a great insight, Tara. And I think it's such a challenge for a lot of organizations to feel empowered to do that. Or they say, well, here's the program rules. This is what we set up. This is what we got to do. And then you end up with exactly as you described, that kind of square peg round hole. And they're like, oh, well, this program didn't work. We'll just stop doing it, instead of taking the good information and trying to make it better. And it sounds like you've built the trust then to continue to show the value to all your partners and all the businesses that you're working with to continue to generate that pipeline. That's really exciting, really great model. Lauren, are there any other questions, or Darrene, do you have any questions for our group?
Well, there actually there's some wonderful commentary also in the chat, and I'll get back to what we'll do with the chat because we're going to send that out to everybody. So don't have anxiety that you'll lose any of the great resources that are in there. But there is one last question that just came in that is interesting about the digital divide and addressing assistance across the digital divide. Is there maybe one person that might want to jump in on that one?
Yeah, I'm glad to mention something on that. We saw that, I believe, Tara, you brought this up as well around the e-commerce piece. We saw the businesses that were in e-commerce did so much better than businesses who weren't in surviving and making it through the first rounds of trauma of the pandemic. And so our Inclusive Business Resource Network, we immediately started putting some money into a la carte services to help businesses build out their web presence. And it's, again, just having that network in place, drafting off the good work that was already been going in the community. I think that continues to be a conversation that we, collectively need to think about how to get, there's the digital divide and then there's the e-commerce divide. Like they're both of those things are real, obviously. And so we're also seeing that in BIPOC businesses getting into trade. It's a difficulty for businesses that don't know what they don't know, and they don't know that they could get into trade and take their hot sauce that's on their shelf in their restaurant and turn it into something they could sell in another country or another region, or move it into a traded sector business. And so it's like all of these things kind of align together, and a quick intervention would be, it doesn't cost a lot of money to get web services up and going, especially if you kind of buy in bulk, I guess, as a government agency. Get organizations that are ready to move on, getting the right person who, and you have those small business advisors they have the pipeline, of individuals that they say, this person really is ready to move outside of the Portland market. They're ready to sell in Seattle. They're ready to sell somewhere else. Yeah, so that's a thing.
And I just want to add on to with Andy, the digital divide was something that I worried about prior to the pandemic. And then I think it was just expounded upon after the pandemic. And it's like you're either there or you're not there. And if you're not there, you're losing, potential customers. And so what we try to do in our work with AWS and our NUB8, the partners, is just to make that so that when we leave, we don't go away. We're supportive. And so that if someone needs to make updates, make sure that they have everything that they possibly could need to be able to, when we're not around, that they continue to update, upgrade, post information. So really making it as simplistic as possible, taking down that curtain and seeing the man behind the curtain, and just making it very simplistic for people, and so that they are able to compete. We've got a lot of folks that are doing Instagram because it's on their phone, but they're losing that, being able to build that customer base by the call to action and sending them to their website. So we're really working to educate, and we're going to continue pushing that, continue working with our Department of Technology Services and others to ensure that we're not leaving anybody behind. I think that that's key. I worry that as we move on in this, that we are leaving people behind, and I don't want to do that.
I also want to note that Katie had also shared another digital readiness resource in the chat. So we've kind of heard from each of you on that. And with that, I think I'm going to get us closed up here for the day. This has been a really enriching conversation. I want to thank Tara, Ellen, Katie, Darrene, and Andy for your time today in exploring the insights in the report. For everyone here who's on the call, we're going to share all the resources that you saw in the chat today in a follow-up email to all of you who have registered, including a recording of this call, as well as a link to the report and the one-pager around the report. So you'll get a great care package after today with all the goodies that came up. And then I also would love for everyone who attended today, if you would be open to answering kind of this one question survey. The intention here is, what do you need to know more about these insights to be supportive of your work? So it's just a simple question. And then of course, if you have any other feedback about this event or any other things you'd like to know, please just drop that there. But it's intended to just get a sense of how can this information support your work now and into the future, and how we can be more responsive to your needs as program designers and thinking about working on recovery. So with that, again, thank you all to our panelists and our speakers today, and for everyone who attended, and here's to more equitable recovery in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.